Vladimir Efremov, a renowned Russian physicist, spent 8 minutes beyond the boundary of life and death, and upon returning, he drew a series of truly sensational conclusions. "No," he whispered barely audibly as he came to, "there is life there too, and it is completely different, much better." This unusual episode happened unexpectedly. Vladimir Grigorievich, the leading engineer of the Impulse Design Bureau, suddenly lost consciousness due to a sharp coughing fit. He collapsed onto the sofa and froze, showing no signs of life. His relatives at first thought he had simply lain down to rest, but Natalia, his sister and a doctor by training, was the first to realize that something serious was happening. She tried to bring her brother to his senses, gently touching his shoulder and asking how he felt. There was no response, and no pulse could be felt. Without wasting a second, Natalia began resuscitation. For 8 minutes, she fought for his life until she finally felt a weak heartbeat. When the scientist began breathing on his own, she said with relief that he was alive. And Vladimir, still not fully recovered, whispered, "No, this is not the end. There is life there too, but it is different. Much better." After what he experienced, Efremov described in detail everything that happened to him on the other side, calling it his personal experience of exploring posthumous reality. His conclusions were published and created the effect of an exploding bomb at a scientific congress where he delivered a report. The head of the International Club of Scientists, Professor Anatoly Smirnov, stated that what he heard was so astonishing that it would have been impossible to simply invent it. Vladimir Grigorievich was an authoritative specialist in the field of artificial intelligence. For many years he devoted himself to work on space technologies, participated in projects related to the launch of Yuri Gagarin and the creation of modern rocket systems, and was awarded state honors. Before experiencing clinical death, Efremov remained a convinced atheist, fully relying on science and considering talk of life after death to be religious fantasies. However, the experience he went through completely changed his views. On the 12th of March, while at the home of his sister Natalia Grigorievna, the scientist suddenly felt a sharp coughing fit. His breathing became intermittent, his lungs seemed to fail, and he could not take a breath. His body stiffened, his heart stopped, and a wheeze escaped from his chest. Vladimir thought that this was the end, but his consciousness did not disappear. In an instant, he felt an extraordinary lightness. The pain went away. A sense of peace appeared, as if he had returned to carefree childhood. He stopped feeling his body and could not see it, but memory, emotions, and thoughts remained. It seemed as though he was rapidly moving through a gigantic tube. This sensation of flight was familiar to him. Something similar he had already experienced in dreams. He tried to slow down the movement and change its direction. And it worked. Instead of horror, calm came. Analyzing what was happening, Vladimir concluded, the world he had entered was real. If he was capable of thinking, then he existed. Moreover, his thoughts directly influenced his surroundings. Efremov described what he experienced this way. The space around me was bright, saturated, overflowing with energy. Consciousness worked differently. It encompassed everything at once, without boundaries of time and space. I watched as the world seemed to compress into a tube. The sun was not visible, but light was present everywhere, uniform, without shadows. On the walls of this tube I distinguished shapes, but it was impossible to determine where was up and where was down. I tried to remember what I was flying over, and these pictures resembled mountain landscapes. Everything was deposited in memory without effort, as if it had become boundless. I began to reason mentally, forming images. At some point, the question arose, is it possible to return to the past, and to what extent can consciousness influence surrounding reality? I imagined an old, broken television from my apartment, and immediately saw it entirely, from all sides. Everything was revealed to me, where it came from, where the ore for the metal was mined, at which factory it was assembled, and even the personal story of the steelworker who had problems with his mother-in-law. I knew every detail about this television, including the exact cause of the breakdown. After I returned to life, I replaced the faulty element, and the device worked again. Then I understood how colossal the power of thought is. In our design bureau, for 2 years, we unsuccessfully tried to solve a complex problem related to cruise missiles. But as soon as I mentally visualized the design, the solution came instantly. It turned out to be so obvious that I immediately recorded it and successfully implemented it in practice. Over time, the scientist began to realize that he was not alone in this world. I noticed that the exchange of information with the surrounding space became two-way, he recalled. At first, it seemed to me that the answers to my questions were simply a continuation of my own thoughts, but later I realized the knowledge I received went far beyond my earthly experience. The information that came to me in this tube was immeasurably broader than everything I had known before. I was guided by a being completely free of any limitations. It possessed boundless power, was omnipotent, and overflowing with love. This invisible but distinctly felt subject acted extremely cautiously so as not to cause me fear. I began to see phenomena and problems in their entire cause and effect chain. Although there was no physical vision, perception remained extremely clear and precise. I came to the conclusion that I had encountered a manifestation of divine presence. Suddenly I felt a barrier. I was sharply pulled out of this state, as if a root vegetable from the ground, despite my desire to stay. After all, I felt good there. Everything around began to spin and flash, and I saw my sister's face distorted by fear. At the same time, I myself was filled with a sense of delight. In his scientific works, Vladimir Efremov tried to connect physics and the theme of posthumous existence. We tried to convey his ideas in a simpler form, avoiding complex terms. When asked how one could describe the world he entered after death, he explained it this way: all objects in this space are in a rigid interconnection, and their interaction obeys certain laws. A person is capable of influencing these objects solely by the power of thought. Almost instantly, Efremov was able to change the shape of the tube along which he was moving and alter the outlines of surrounding objects. While in this state, he came to the conclusion that human perception in this dimension is completely dependent on his desires. This is exactly what he explained as the reason why accounts of people who have experienced clinical death differ so greatly from one another. For Vladimir Efremov himself, the experience he went through was filled with such powerful joy that nothing earthly could compare to it. Even the feeling of first love, in his words, paled in comparison to these sensations. However, he also had to face difficult moments. During his journey, he again felt resistance hindering forward movement. There arose a sensation as if he was being pulled out like a plant from the soil. The space began to spin, and once again the pale face of his sister, gripped by panic, appeared before him, while he himself was filled with jubilation. Later he told those close to him, "Death no longer frightens me. I know. It is merely a door to another world." Write in the comments what you think about Vladimir Efremov's words, and whether you believe in the existence of life after death. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Thank you all for your feedback.